Hello world, and we are back. My name's Fischl. This is going to be episode 217 of my poker vlog. For this one, I play a ton of fun hands at Orange City Racing and Card Club. I have a bunch of hands to go over. If you are unable to see me in my travels, feel free to mix it up with me online. You can message me on Instagram or Telegram. Happy to get back to you. And with that out of the way, let's roll the tape. We arrive at Orange City Racing and Card Club looking to build on some recent past success before we buy into the game for $1,000 and we look down at the first hand of note. When the under the gun player limps, I'm in the +1 position with pocket nines. I decide to raise this one up to $20, and when I do that, the button and the limper decide to call. So we end up going three ways to a flop, which comes Queen 7 Deuce Rainbow. Only one overcard is pretty good for pocket nines. When it checks to me, we want to be doing a lot of checking when we're out of position, but when the board is this dry, I think our hand functions better as a bet. I don't think our opponent's going to be stabbing a whole lot with actual air, and if they don't have a queen, they're likely going to just fold. Versus when we check, we're going to get a lot of checkbacks, and when the turn is like a 10, we really have no idea where we're at this point, so this pocket nines will be a continuation bet of $35. And to this bet, both players pretty quickly fold. Not a super eventful hand, but it is the first hand. And we start with a W. It's great for confidence, great for momentum. Let's see if we can continue it. When we look down at pocket queens in the cutoff, with a button straddle, the small blind who is first to act min clicks it to 20. This brings along the big blind and the hijack. Before me and the cutoff, we can't just call here. We have to go pretty big in this spot. Definitely don't want to go massively multi-way with pocket queens. So I settle on a sizing of $90. This doesn't thin the field too much as the small blind and the hijack decide to call. So we end up going three ways to a flop, which comes Jack 8-3 with two hearts. The small blind checks, but then the hijack decides to just lead for $100. And when it's on me, I don't think this is a spot where I can just call. Small leads multi-way into an aggressor. Typically, in my experience, has always been draws trying to name their own price. And when my opponent can have 9-10, any two hearts, maybe occasionally a weakish jack that's trying to name their own price, we have got to pump some money in here when we're well ahead of a majority of my opponent's range. So I make it $350. This bet size is mainly designed to set up for a two-street kind of game, because the player in the small blind has about $800, so if he calls, it'll be a $500 pretty easy jam on any unconnected turn card. The hijack who led for 100 only has about $500 in his stack, so I expect if he's going to continue, he's just going to get it in right here. But for the $350 raise, the small blind folds pretty quickly, but then the hijack goes deep into the tank. He thinks for a while, gathers all the chips in hand, looks like he's going to fold, looks like he's going to put all his chips in. He is really going back and forth before he finally settles on a fold. Maybe the raise was just too big for a jack to hang on, but we definitely don't want to give hearts and straight draws a good price. So either way, we will take the win. And if queens worked out once, why not try to run it back? This time we're in the +1 spot. When the under the gun player limps, I make it $25. This bet brings the cutoff and the limper along, so we end up going three ways to a flop, which comes 9-8-4 Rainbow. And in this hand, the under the gun player decides to lead into me a second time when I have queens. And both times I have an overpair. This time I think the board is a little less draw heavy. Thinking it's more likely my opponent just has a random 9 here, I think I'm going to just call, keep him in there, not give him any reason to be able to fold here by raising. But when I make the call, the player behind me calls as well. So we end up going three ways to a turn card. And at this point, my inner monologue has seen a lot of bad turn cards whenever I choose a more passive. And in my head, I'm literally saying to myself, man, a deuce would be a sick turn card. And somehow the deuce of clubs comes out just as I was thinking it. This card for some reason slows my opponent down. The other gun player checks to me, and I'm not going to check this one back. I almost certainly have the best hand, and tons of worse hands would happily pay off a bet, 9x, straight draws. So I continue for $85. And this bet brings the player to my left along, and the under the gun player calls as well. So we end up going three ways to a river card. And at this point, my inner monologue is once again saying, man, a deuce would be a pretty sick river card. I'd be pretty much ahead of absolutely everything. And for some reason, the dealer heard me a second time. The river is the deuce of diamonds. And at this point, I just want to take a second and appreciate the safest runout that has ever happened in the history of poker.
There we go. You fucking happy? Come on.
I mean, we just counterfeited 9-8 if our opponents ever had that, although I expected to have raised at some point. But when it checks to me, we're definitely going to go for some value. I think my opponent's range is heavily some 9x, maybe some 8x. Straight draws aren't really calling anything, so we can't just bomb away on this one. We really want like 9-10, ace-9, and maybe some 8s to come along here. So we're going to go relatively small in relation to the size of the pot. I bet $150. The player to my left does not take very long at all before calling, even while saying out loud that he thinks he's beat. That's a pretty good sign, I'd say. And the under the gun player decides to fold. When I show pocket queens, they are definitely good. We take another decent sized pot down, and we are cruising at Orange City. Following that, I look down at pocket 8s from the button. When the cutoff raises to $20, I decide to make the call, think it's fine to just set mine here, and the big blind comes along as well. So we end up going 3 ways to a flop, which comes queen 5-3 with 2 clubs. When it checks to me, I'm going to throw out a c-bet here. Similarly to the first hand, I think 8s is just going to take it down a lot of the time, unless the big blind happens to have a queen here. When I bet $40, this time the big blind and the cutoff decide to call. So instead of 2 folds, we get 2 calls. Our hand is pretty severely downgraded at this point. And when the turn card is the 4 of diamonds, 6-7 gets there. But how many people are going to call over pot size with a gut shot? I don't think it's all too likely. When it checks to me, I think getting to showdown is a little bit more important at this point. Still ahead of 5x and some 6-4 club draws. We're still beating some hands, but we really don't expect any queen x to fold on this turn card. So when we check it back, the river is the king of hearts. I actually expect it to check to me a lot of the time, and I'm considering if I'm going to turn this king into a bluff to force a queen to fold. But the big blind just leads out for $175, and it folds to me.
As we suspected, the deal did not go as planned.
This is certainly not a snap fold. I don't think a queen can ever throw out this bet, so it's kind of polar at this point. My opponent either has straight missed clubs, or he's saying he somehow has a king, which king x of clubs is definitely possible, but would a single pair even go this big into 2 players? I don't know. I think about this one for a while. I think it'd be pretty sick to bluff catch here and have my opponent just have like 5-6 of clubs, ace-5 of clubs, maybe just pocket 6s, pocket 7s that block the nuts and think that they have a good hand to turn into a bluff and get queens to fold. Very dynamic river card. I'm interested to see what the public thinks about this one, if this should just be a fold 100% of the time, or if bluff catching makes sense here. I, at the end of the day, just decide to let it go, think rivers are under bluffed, and my opponent does not show, so we will never know if I made the right decision or not. But pocket pairs are a lot easier when you flop sets. So when I look down at pocket 6s in the hijack, under the gun raises to $20, I call in a small blind call. We go 3 ways, where I flop a set on king jack 6 with 2 hearts.
This is a dream come true. I feel like I have died and gone to heaven.
I have that dream too, but you go in the other direction.
On this board, the under the gun player decides to continue for $40. I think in position, I can just call here. I'll always get to make sure bets get in on future streets if my opponents ever try to slow down. And I think when the king and jack specifically are the 2 heart cards, I think it's slightly less likely that my opponent has flush draws and more likely have big Broadway type single pair holdings. So calling seems to be the most reasonable option for me. When I call, the small blind decides to call as well, so I end up going 3 ways to a turn card, which is the 7 of hearts. This is the more dicey draw completing turn cards that I'm more accustomed to. Frankly, I'm shocked that it's not the 9 of hearts completing queen 10, the only straight draw that's really possible. But on this card, the small blind checks inflow, and then the under the gun player decides to check as well. Even though the flush completed, I have a set. I can't just check this back. There's just too much king x and jack x holdings that we want to get some value from that are actually drawing dead at this point. So I bet $85. The small blind does not take too long before folding, and then the under the gun player thinks for a little bit, but thankfully decides to call. So we are heads up to a river card, and this time we do get a brick, 4 of clubs, a very welcomed sight, and we really can't bomb away at this river card because we do run into some brick walls, My opponent does actually have a flush sometimes. A lot of players will make their flush and then check because most of their range checks when they are the aggressor and there's a nut changing card. Additionally, the King X and Jack X can't call a massive bet anyway, especially on this board. So we're going to go relatively small in relation to the size of the pot. I bet 165, under half pot, trying to get those ace kings and king queens to crying call. And it looks like I sized it relatively well because my opponent immediately looks uncomfortable and has generally revealed that he's in the call or fold category. So after 10 to 15 seconds of tanking, I'm definitely rooting for a call here. Would love to get paid, but after a few more seconds of thinking, my opponent will eventually let his hand go. We do not get paid on the river, but I am happy that I went for river value. There are times where I'm not top of my game where I think that I'm just going to check this back and eliminate the possibility of getting check raised and just kind of play a little passive and weak. But we go for some value here. It doesn't get paid, but hopefully we can get paid on the next hand of note. I'm in the big blind with King Jack offsuit. With one limp, the button decides to raise to $20. I'm in the big blind. Don't really think this one's too good for a 3-bet, so I just call. The limper decides to fold, so we end up going heads up to a flop, which comes ace 9-3 rainbow. My opponent in this hand had been c-betting at nearly 100% frequency, so I was actually planning on a check raise here with just stone air. This would be one of the few times where I just raise, and if I get re-raised or my opponent continues, it's just a one and done. It's more just testing him because he can't have it every time, right? But this was one of the few times throughout the whole day where I checked it to my opponent and he checked it back. I actually think I have the best hand here at King High a lot of the time at this point. And when the turn is the Queen of Hearts, I check because now I have a gutter and my opponent could easily have like Queen Jack, Queen 10. And with this card, my opponent bets $20. I think he has a queen a lot of the time here, and I do think my king is live. And for $20, I think I get a ton of implied odds to be able to continue for the miracle times that I actually hit my 10. And do you believe in miracles? The river is the 10 of hearts.
Amazing. Absolutely amazing. I love my work.
I consider leading here because I really don't want this to get checked through, but I do think my opponent is quite aggressive in general. If he was checking back an ace on a super dry board where he's not afraid of any run out, they are certainly betting this river card. And if my opponent has stone air, 6-7, 5-4, things like that, he is certainly going to throw out a bluff attempt, I believe. When I check it to him, he does not disappoint. He assembles a bet of $75. Almost full pots it. This is an incredible development. He's saying he has a very strong hand. Maybe he has ace queen or ace 10. I think that this is one where we have to go over 3x for our raise size. Straights in general are good to go big with because we unblock all the pairs that our opponent's going to call with, all the sets, all the 2 pairs. And how is he ever going to think we went runner straight with King Jack? So I go a little over 3x. I bet $275, and my opponent does not really give the impression that he's going to fold. I played a decent amount of hands with this opponent throughout the day, and I really just folded to his aggression for all the other times. Maybe he believes that I'm just taking a stand right now, and he's going to convince himself to pay me off even lighter. Maybe he just has an ace-x hand that he can't get away from. Whatever his reasons are, he does decide to put in the call. We have the nuts, we get paid on the river, and everything just seems to be going smoothly today. On the next fun hand of poker, we look down at pocket kings. Yes, the deck is smacking us in the face today, getting a lot of premiums, a lot of good hands in a short period of time. Definitely love to see it. And on this one, the under the gun player raised to $15. 3 callers before I'm in the cutoff with pocket kings. I have to go really big with this one. People are just not folding at this table, and we certainly don't want it to go 4 or 5 ways with kings. So I'd make it $120. I think it's a pretty good sizing. And to this bet, 1 by 1, every single opponent folds. But we do pick up $60 in dead money, and that will lead us to the final hand of note. I look down at ace-queen offsuit in the hijack. With 1 limp, I raise to $25, and only the limper decides to call, so we end up going heads up to a flop, which comes ace, king, 8 with 2 diamonds. When it checks to me, we technically have top pair, top kicker. We don't expect our opponent to have ace-king ever, being a limp caller. Ace-8, not impossible, but I suppose we'll just cross that bridge when we get to it. I bet $25, standard continuation bet, half pot size. My opponent decides to make the call. Everything's looking pretty good. The turn is the queen of clubs. Jack 10 completes, but we make 2 pair. We don't really expect my opponent to have Jack 10 almost ever. We also don't really expect a king to pay off multiple streets. But when there's a diamond draw and a club draw now available, we have to bet. We have to protect our 2 pair. I bet $75. And to this bet, my opponent decides to make the call. The river is the 9 of hearts. It's pretty much a brick in my mind. Jack 10 was already there. Don't really expect my opponent to have pocket 9s ever. So when he checks to me, I think my opponent's range is most likely missed diamonds, missed clubs, or maybe sometimes random kings. And I think the best way to get value from these hands when my opponent checks to me is to down bet my turn bet. I bet $60.
The distance between insanity and genius is measured only by success.
I think if my opponent has a king, he might actually cry call this one. But if he's got like 5-6 of diamonds, that hand might just turn their hand into a bluff, thinking the down bet is weakness, and I can happily just pick it off with my 2 pair. But for this $60 bet, my opponent doesn't take too long before just putting in the call. I guess they had just some level of showdown value, but it's not going to be better than 2 pair. We win a final hand of the day, and everything went relatively well today. We end up making $670 across 3 hours, which equated to $230 an hour or 44 big blinds an hour. Yeah, this was pretty much a dream session. I feel like all the hands pretty much went my way. I had over pairs and they held up, got pretty safe runouts, made sets. I think I value betted pretty much the most correct size to get paid by the hands I was targeting. Everything seemed to work out pretty well for me today. Happy that the run good continues. Thank you for making it all the way to this point. I appreciate every view, subscription, and like I receive, and I will see you on the next one.